So what we have to do is pay attention to energy when it's not a problem to solve the issue, because that's when we can build. We couldn't add to the Strategic Petroleum Reserve right now because the prices are too high. When it gets cheap, then we could afford to do that. But then we won't see why it's important, because why would we do that? Energy's not a problem. There is good news on the horizon. Last year, the Congress passed a bill called the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007. I basically contracted to write this book between mid-September and mid-January. That's sort of the way the book industry works, and it actually came out pretty quick in July. Most books don't appear quite that quickly, but they realized it was a timely topic. Well, this bill passes in December, and here I am finishing up my book, and they pass, I say, well, there's been 3 major legislative packages in history, and all of a sudden the 4th one shows up. So not only do I have to include that in the book, but I have to become a little bit more optimistic about where we're headed, because this bill actually has some real content to it, unlike many energy bills. It goes back, at this point, the energy efficiency standards for automobiles has not been updated since 1988. We've gone, almost 20 years with no updates. And this bill mandates, it starts to put the light trucks, which is the SUVs and the trucks and the vans and the cars, into one pot, and they currently get about 25 miles per gallon. And this requires by 2020 that they be at 35 miles per gallon. I would have preferred to go faster, harder, but that's not bad. It also has very strict requirements for biofuels. I'm not too wild about the heavy subsidies for corn-based ethanol, but many of the other forms of biofuels I think can make a very positive contribution. A third part of the bill was mandating more efficient appliances and lighting. And by the year 2015, the old incandescent light bulb, which has been the workhorse since Thomas Edison, will be illegal in this country for all practical purposes. And hopefully at that time we'll even be moving beyond fluorescent lights, because we'll have LED lighting and other much more advanced forms of lighting. So we've taken an important step on moving to a positive energy future. And I'm a little bit of I'm a political scientist. That's how I was trained. So I try to look at the economics of issues. I try to look at the geology of oil. I try to look at the international ramifications. And from a political standpoint, I said, well, why did this end up passing so easily after years of no action? So I did some calls up to Washington, and I talked to people that were involved in the bill, and I said, well, who are the people who would get the most credit for this, if you were to pick the top 4 people? And they said, well, the mileage efficiency standard came through the Commerce Committee, and the chairman and the ranking member both really got behind this and helped it pass. And I'll get to them in a minute. I want to end with that in this section. The sponsor of this bill were Dianne Feinstein, who was the senator from California, has been a long supporter of mileage efficiency standards. And she has roots going back to the 50s on this issue, or the 70s on this issue, because she was mayor of San Francisco when the second great oil crisis hit California in 1979. So she had a long background in this issue. The other sponsor was Olympia Snowe, a Republican senator from Maine, who I know kept her interest in energy during the 80s when people were losing that. So it kind of made sense that the 2 of them were there, one Republican, one Democrat. The chairman of the committee, and Olympia Snowe had been elected to the Congress in the 70s, so again, she had been there in Washington during these crises. On the leadership side, the chairman of the committee was Daniel Inouye. And Daniel Inouye has been in the Senate for a long time. He was there when President Carter was in office. He was there much earlier than that, so he lived through these crises of the 70s. The Republican ranking member of the committee was someone that's in the paper almost every day right now, not necessarily for reasons that he would choose, Senator Ted Stevens of Arkansas. And when I say that, a lot of people are surprised. Well, why would... Pardon? Alaska, I'm sorry, yes. Why would Senator Stevens be a champion of mileage efficiency standards? Well, in Alaska, the permafrost is melting because of climate change. And once he had made that judgment, he decided that he would be a champion for energy efficiency to prevent more changes to his state. And again, he had been in the Senate in the 70s and had debated this issue back in those days. And from this, I concluded that people who had a long-term perspective were somehow better able to deal with this issue. There were other strange pickups. Some the senators from Mississippi and Tennessee who had historically opposed mileage efficiency standards came out in favor of them. Why would that be? Well, Nissan had started to build automobile plants in their state, and Nissan favored efficiency standards, and so the business community was backing it up. So you have to have an open mind on politics. Things are changing. You know, Ted Stevens is supporting mileage efficiency standards. Trent Lott, when he was in the Senate, became a champion of mileage efficiency standards, and so you have to keep an open mind. Well, I think we have great potential for the future on the automobile. I think the hybrid car is still a fairly young technology, so it has a lot of opportunities to improve. The diesel technology has made incredible progress. We used to not like diesels because they were noisy and they polluted with a lot of sulfur. All those problems have been worked out. The new diesels meet the clean air requirements, not only the national requirements, but the California requirements that are much stricter. And then there are a lot of other things you can do with an automobile. What I think will eventually be going into the tank are algae-based fuels. Algae-based fuels are probably the most flexible and economic, at least on paper, of the new fuels. You can make gasoline from algae. You can make diesel fuel from algae. You can make jet fuel from algae. And I think the next president should assign the Air Force the responsibility of developing these new fuels. They've got a big research budget. And our jets wouldn't have to rely on Middle Eastern oil or any foreign oil. They could be fine on algae-based fuels. I think on electric generation, things are more difficult. I think we need to look at the efficiency of buildings and try to reduce the load on our electric usage. I don't think there's any free lunch out there. I'm a supporter of wind and solar, but they're not totally benign. Nuclear has a lot of problems with waste disposal in particular, but it does not emit greenhouse gas emissions, and that counts for a lot given this problem. So with presidents, I think we have given them a tough charge. I liked Bob Schieffer's question last night because what he asked, and I actually had the opportunity to discuss this with Bob Schieffer a couple weeks ago. What he asked was more subtle, and the candidates didn't pick up on it. He said, what goals are you going to set for your first term? Because what some presidents do is they set a goal far off into the future that will only succeed or fail after they leave office, so they'll never be held accountable. President Nixon did this. He said, we're going to go down to 0 imports by 1985. You know, well, he wasn't going to be around. Now, Gerald Ford, his staff said, he said, I think we need to announce we're going to reduce imports by 1 million barrels next year and 2 million the next year. And all of his aides says, you can't do that, because if it doesn't happen, it's going to hurt you politically. And President Ford said, well, that might be true, but it still would be good for the country if we had these goals. And so he violated he ignored the political advice he did and did the right thing. Unfortunately for him, the benefits of his policies were enjoyed more by Carter and Reagan than they were when Ford was in office. So from a political standpoint, life is somewhat unfair. Because if you do the right thing, it may end up helping your successor more than it helps you.